This video is an introduction to the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. And so we're in this unit, we're going to be looking at the time period 1870 to 1920. So this will serve as an overview for that time period. So the first thing I want you to think about, though, is in order to tell the story of the time period, we have to understand how important massive immigration coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as Asia, is to the story. And so I always like to start with usually a brainstorm of why do people come to the United States as immigrants? Rather than have you brainstorm, I came up with some factors already. And you notice there's two categories. Push factors are those things in the home country of the immigrant that make them want to leave. So something such as famine. You may have already studied in the past about the Irish potato famine, which led to so many individuals not having enough to eat, and it led to massive immigration from their country. Maybe having a civil war in their country. There's been civil wars throughout history that have led people to feel it's no longer safe in their home country and to seek another location. Religious persecution. Again, throughout history, there have been times where certain religions have not been welcome in their countries. An example of this would be the persecution in Russia of Jewish individuals who decided to leave as a result of it. It could be a very brutal dictatorship that makes people want to leave, extreme poverty, a lack of jobs that are no longer, there's just not enough jobs for all the people that live there, or perhaps natural disasters. At the same time that there are factors pushing people out of their country, they could go anywhere in the world because perhaps there's another place where there's not any of these factors. But what pulls people instead to America? There's something special about our country that makes people want to come here. One of those is the idea of the American dream. And I tend to think of the American dream in kind of two areas. One of them is the desire to own their own business someday. And some of you may think of desiring to be entrepreneurs at some point in the future. The other part is the ability to own your own home, because that's not possible in every country. And I think that also fits with the American dream. There may be more, but those two kind of have seemed to be a defining factor. The fact that perhaps there's more economic opportunity here where people can either make more money, they can have jobs that they maybe could never have had before. When you look at women in particular, there's a lot more opportunity for women to work in this country than there are in many places in the world. It could be a matter of education. Again, there's places in the world where girls and women just aren't given an education. So perhaps they want to come for that. There's a lot of people that come for higher education in particular, where they get their bachelor's degree or master's degree here in the United States. They do a little bit of work and then they go back to their home country. Or maybe they stay here because it's just so much better, the opportunity to get an education and succeed. There is safety and security that kind of goes with that idea of poverty and religious persecution, all that. We have religious freedom here where we welcome people from all walks of life. The idea of liberty, of the restrictions of people's lives in some of their home countries are so severe that they feel like they have no say whatsoever in their lives, and they're drawn to this idea that they can here. And maybe just a better life in general for their children, especially, is why people come. Perhaps you can think of some others. The Gilded Age itself, if I was to describe the time period, I would say that it is a period of transformation in the United States. Prior to this, we were largely an agricultural nation, a farming nation. But now, through this time period, we're going to become increasingly industrialized. So this is kind of it's really the second industrial revolution that happens in the United States, and really the bigger of the two. The first one did bring about some factories and some changes, but this one's really going to hit home. And also an urbanized society. What I mean by that is a movement towards cities. By 1920 is the first time that the census, which is the count of people in the United States, will say that more people live in cities than they do in rural areas. Of course, at the time, they defined a city as 2,500 people, which is really, really small, but that was an urbanized area. And through movements such as this, the change to industrialization, the change to cities, brings about significant economic, which is money, political, social, environmental, and cultural changes. So what exactly, when we talk about the word Gilded Age, what does gilded mean? And here is the definition for you. And it's covered thinly with a layer of gold, perhaps gold paint or something like that. And I'm reminded of when I had the opportunity to go to St. Petersburg, Russia, one year, and I went into the palace of Catherine the Great. And everywhere you went, there were these opulent looking statues, and there was gold paint it looked like on the walls. And I'm sure that it was just simply covered in a layer of gold, but it made it look so rich and so wealthy. And so that's why they do this. Now, the person who came up with the term Gilded Age is someone that you probably have heard of before, and that is the author Mark Twain. And he did this as a form of satire. He was poking fun at society. And this was an era that, if you looked at it on the surface, it was a time of enormous wealth. There's rapid industrialization expansion. It looks like everything is just so wonderful, just like that gold paint does. But if you were to chip away at the paint, or in this case, if you were to look below that exterior surface, you would find that there's serious political, economic, and social problems happening in the country. This is an example. This is the Vanderbilt estate, and we will learn a little bit more about a man by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt, who is a giant in the railroad industry. And this is his estate in Rhode Island. And just to show you how opulent and rich and wealthy these individuals were, they would have balls and they would have parties in which they would take and they would roll $100 bills into cigarettes and smoke them and not even worry about $100 gone. So that's an example. So prior to this, we had two waves of immigration. This is really the third wave. So the first one is called the colonial era. And this is when we have the first immigrants coming from England and Scotland and areas like that. And they're largely English speaking individuals, some coming for religious freedom, some coming for economics to be able to start businesses. And then we have the second wave that comes between 1840 and 1850. And these are Irish and German immigrants. And when they come, they face some discrimination, even though they seem like they're from a similar Northern European. They do speak English and they have similar cultures. And we'll come back to that. And then the third wave is the wave we're talking about now. And this is from 1870 to 1920. And this is when people come from Southern and Eastern Europe, as well as China. These individuals are seen as different because they are unskilled, they don't speak English, and they probably spent their last amount of money on the boat ride getting to America. And so they settle in the cities such as New York City and Boston. They're on the ports, and occasionally they're able to move inland. But they're a very different kind of perceived group from the others. So with new people, with all of this massive humanity that comes during this time, come new opportunities. These opportunities include the growth of cities. Because of immigrants, we need places for them to live. So we're going to create tenements, which you'll learn about later. And we're going to create skyscrapers for the first time. We're also going to have a massive need for workers, and the factories are going to grow as a result of this. New businesses. We're going to see during this time period the very first millionaires in this country, and it's because there is such a ready supply of labor. But at the same time, we get these problems that are going to creep up. There's going to be a lot of people, businessmen, politicians, who are just really greedy. There's going to be corruption. There's going to be the urbanization may sound like a good thing, the growth of cities, it's kind of on both sides. But it's going to be problems such as overcrowding. There's not going to be a sewage system. There's going to be disease that'll spread because people are cramped into these small little tenements. And then there's also in the factories going to be industrial accidents because there's not the security protections that there are today that help workers. So as we begin our unit on immigration and on the Gilded Age, I want you to think about if you've ever had an experience of moving somewhere new or maybe starting a new school. You've all started a new school at some point, whether it was in kindergarten or first grade, whether it was going to middle school or when you went to high school. And if you can't think of an example for yourself, think of someone else who has known that kind of an experience and how it was difficult for them. How did they overcome these difficulties? And that will help you to have empathy for what immigrants face. And one of the things about the characteristics that we're going to describe, those push-pull factors that I initially mentioned, is that it doesn't matter whether you're the pilgrim who came in the early time period of the 1600s, whether you were an Irish immigrant in the 1840s, whether you were a new immigrant coming in 1915, whether you're an immigrant that came from Asia during the 1960s and 70s, or whether you're an immigrant today. These are all similar reasons for why people come to the United States. They're pushed out of their country, they're pulled to America. And the immigrant experience has been consistent throughout time. Even though there might be differences in terms of jobs and shelter and all of that, immigrants have had to adapt and overcome certain prejudices, certain challenges, the language barrier. And I want you to really think about those as we go through this unit. Here is a shared quote from a Russian Jewish woman in the late 1800s that says, "Not the looking forward made me go, but the looking backward made me search a new life and struggle a hard battle. It is hard still now to bear the homesickness, loneliness among strange people not knowing the language, doing hard work without a minute of joy. But when I look back into my childhood, always under a terrible fear, I think that there is not anything harder." So even though we're going to talk about the hardships that immigrants face during this time period, you have to understand where they came from, understand whether or not this was the land of opportunity. And that's one of the things that I'm going to ask you to keep in your mind as we go throughout this entire unit is, was America the land of opportunity for new immigrants during this time period? And you're going to find information that helps you on both sides. But always remember with immigration, whenever we talk about their current situation in the United States, always think about, is it better than what they had before at home when you're thinking about whether or not it was the land of opportunity. And finally, today, your activity is going to be to examine this cartoon. So you will look for this assignment to help you in beginning to examine primary sources, but also the experience of immigrants. And that is the overview for this unit. Thank you.